Hello gamers. So now that the 7.1 beta is open, we're getting some information about vodyanitsa's kit, and I read through it myself, tried to summarize it in some points as simply as possible. We can go over her kit, see how it works, how we feel about it. So for a quick little overview, she is a hydro off-field DPS, so a sub DPS. She is a catalyst user, which is nice because that means she can hold thrilling tales. She has stellar swirl supportive capabilities in her kit, but I wouldn't necessarily call her a dedicated stellar swirl support, and you'll see why. She has resistance shred, and she also has some quill mechanics that we will get into. So how does she work? Well, her skill turns her into a mermaid, and this can also be used as an exploration ability. Apparently she can like swim and stuff. How that ends up looking, we'll just have to wait and see. But anyways, her skill turns her into a mermaid and she starts summoning microphones. These microphones do coordinated attacks that reduce the hydro and cryo resistance of enemies that it hits. I haven't put any numbers here because the numbers, I feel, they always change, especially like really early on. So just to give you an idea, I think right now it's at like 26% or something like that. The microphones also provide interruption resistance, and the burst is basically just a nuke. It just does a lot of damage. It's a pretty big number. The only thing is I don't really think you're building this character with like crit or anything. You're probably just stacking HP. So I'm not entirely sure how worth it'll be to use the burst at all. Moving on to the passives, which are pretty important. When the stellar swirl vortexes detonate, they reduce animo res shred. I think it's like 30% right now, but again, just take the numbers with a grain of salt. They might change in the future. And when entering the skill state, she gains stacks of solo and ensemble. Solo stacks are quills that scale based off her max HP, and they only apply to the active character. Ensemble stacks scale the same way, but they only apply to off-field characters. The ensemble quills can be used by the rest of your team from off-field. The solo stacks can only be used by the on-field character. And now we can go over some of her constellations. So her C1 is when she heals you, you gain an attack bonus based on her max HP. Her C2 is a hydro and cryo crit damage buff. I think, just to give you a number right now, it's at 50%. And the stellar swirl crit damage buff is 60% crit damage buff. That only applies to the active character. It also extends her skill duration by about 9 seconds, if I remember. Her C4 gives increased healing for low HP party members. And when she heals high HP party members, it increases her own max HP. Her C6 now applies the C2 buff to all party members. So instead of this hydro, cryo, stellar swirl crit damage buff being only to the active character, it now applies to the whole party. It gives stellar swirl elevation, I think it's 25%, and it gives an extra increase to hydro and cryo damage when the microphones are active, which is her skill. I think this is at 50%, but yeah, that's basically it for vodyanitsa's kit. I think it's pretty simple, actually. Even though she is trying to do a lot of different things, it's relatively simple. There isn't any like crazy mechanics involved. They're all mechanics that we're all very familiar with. So let me know what you guys think about her kit. I do have some personal thoughts about her kit. I do think she feels a little bit weird. I'm just getting a weird vibe. It's not necessarily like a bad thing. It's just kind of, you know, it's a vibe thing. But it's the fact that she's a hydro character who is kind of like, you know, a borderline stellar swirl support, which means she's trying to buff a reaction while being an element that isn't needed to enable that reaction, right? You only need animo and cryo to trigger stellar swirl, but she's a hydro character, so she's just kind of applying a random element in there that isn't necessarily needed. And, you know, maybe to some people that's like a cool thing. I will say that it's definitely more unique, but it's just feels weird, right? I think it just feels weird to me because it's new, right? I don't think that's been done before. I had someone in a YouTube post say that it was similar to Sitlali, but I think Sitlali actually makes sense because she gives hydro and pyro res shred, but that makes a lot of sense because she's a cryo character and you need cryo characters in freeze teams to actually enable the freeze reaction, and you also need hydro characters in freeze teams. So having Hydro Resistance Shred actually makes sense. It also makes sense to have Pyro Res Shred because you need cryo characters to enable the melt reaction. And if you're enabling the melt reaction, then some Pyro character on the team will make use of that Pyro Res Shred. This feels a lot more weird because, you know, she's a Hydro character and she's trying to buff a reaction that she isn't even a part of. It just feels a little bit strange. I think she's trying to do a lot of different things at once. She's trying to be a Stellar Swirl support very clearly based off of her constellations and her kit. She's also somewhat trying to be like a freeze support by reducing Hydro Cryo Res Shred and also trying to buff Hydro Cryo crit damage in her constellations. She also has quills. She's also a healer. Her burst is a nuke. She's doing off-field damage. And I'd say kind of the most unfortunate thing for people who play skirk is that her role overlaps so much with Escoffier that it's actually kind of unfortunate. Like, they both do Hydro Cryo Res Shred, they both do off-field damage, and they're both healers. And because there's so much role overlap there, that makes having both of them on the same team kind of redundant. Now, if we're going to talk about constellations, that's different, right? Her C1 gives an attack bonus, and her C2 gives Hydro Cryo crit damage buff, which is going to be very good for skirk. But of course, that requires constellations. At C0, I can at most see her being a side grade or maybe a very slight upgrade to skirk. I think skirk will still make great use of the quills and the res shred, and also vodyanitsa can hold thrilling tales. So it's not that she's bad for skirk or anything, it's just, you know, she's kind of a side grade, unless you get constellations and then things are different. But yeah, again, let me know what you guys think about vodyanitsa. Is she looking like a pull or skip for you? Is there something I missed? It's very likely that maybe I'm just not thinking of something, like there's some archetype I'm missing. Another thing that released today was Vesna's kit, so I'll probably go over that tomorrow. But for now, that is all I have to say. If you made it this far in the video, you are a real one, and I will see you around. Bye bye.